Welcome back to another spine-chilling episode. Today, we dive into the wilderness with 3 disturbing true camping horror stories that will make you think twice before pitching your tent again. Imagine this: the crackle of a campfire, the whisper of wind through the trees, and the feeling of being completely alone, surrounded by miles of dense, dark forest. It's the kind of scene that brings peace and tranquility to some, but for others, it's the stuff of nightmares. These are the stories of those who ventured into the wild and encountered something truly terrifying, something that lurks just beyond the campfire's light. Get ready, because the stories you're about to hear will chill you to the bone. 4 friends, eager to escape the city, set off on a weekend camping trip, hoping to reconnect with nature and each other. They were full of excitement, their laughter echoing through the trees as they unloaded their gear, the anticipation of adventure palpable in the air. They found the perfect spot, a secluded clearing bathed in the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, a serene haven away from the hustle and bustle of city life. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees, the friends gathered around the crackling fire, the warmth of the flames a comforting presence. They shared stories, jokes and laughter, the warmth of the flames chasing away the growing chill in the air, their camaraderie growing stronger with each passing moment. But as the darkness deepened, a sense of unease settled over them. The once inviting forest now seemed to hold secrets in its shadows. It started subtly, a feeling of being watched, an inexplicable sensation that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end, a flicker of movement in the shadows beyond the firelight, just at the edge of their vision, enough to make them question their senses. They dismissed it at first, attributing it to their imaginations playing tricks on them in the darkness, trying to laugh off their growing fears. But then the strange occurrences began, each one more unsettling than the last. A twig snapping under an unseen foot, the sound sharp and out of place in the stillness of the night, the rustling of leaves when there was no wind, an eerie whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, a pair of eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, quickly disappearing when caught in the firelight, leaving them questioning what they had seen. Fear began to creep into their hearts, replacing the earlier camaraderie with a chilling silence, the forest now a place of unknown terrors. They huddled closer to the fire, casting nervous glances into the surrounding woods, their laughter now replaced with hushed whispers and anxious looks. One of the friends, Jake, decided to investigate, his curiosity and concern outweighing his fear. Armed with a flashlight and a growing sense of dread, he cautiously ventured into the darkness, each step echoing in the silence. The others watched, their breaths held tight as his flashlight beam danced through the trees, illuminating the unknown. Suddenly the beam flickered and died, plunging Jake into absolute darkness, the silence now deafening. A blood-curdling scream pierced the night, followed by an eerie silence that was more terrifying than any scream could ever be, the forest holding its breath. The remaining friends, paralyzed with fear, were left with a horrifying choice. Stay by the fire and wait, or flee into the darkness, not knowing what awaited them in the shadows, their minds racing with fear. They chose to run, their hearts pounding in their chests, the image of the glowing eyes seared into their minds, driving them forward. They didn't stop running until they reached their car, the engine roaring to life like a lifeline in the face of unimaginable terror, the safety of the vehicle a stark contrast to the menace of the woods. To this day they never returned to the woods, forever haunted by the memory of the watcher in the shadows, a tale they would never forget. The experience left them forever changed, their fear a constant reminder of the unseen horrors that lurked just beyond the edge of the firelight, a chilling testament to the unknown. Sarah, an experienced solo camper, decided to spend a weekend in an abandoned campsite deep in the woods. She had always been drawn to the solitude and the challenge of surviving alone in the wilderness. It was a place she'd heard whispers about, a place steeped in local legends and shrouded in an unsettling silence. The locals spoke of strange occurrences and eerie sounds that kept even the bravest at bay. As Sarah set up her tent, the silence pressed in on her, broken only by the sound of her own movements. The forest seemed to be holding its breath, watching her every move. The air hung heavy with an unseen presence, a feeling that she wasn't alone. It was as if the trees themselves were whispering secrets, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. As darkness descended, the temperature plummeted, and a thick fog rolled in, blanketing the campsite in an eerie silence. The fog seemed to muffle all sound, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. Sarah retreated to her tent, the thin nylon walls offering little comfort against the growing sense of dread that washed over her. She could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on her. She tried to ignore the strange noises that began to filter through the darkness. The forest seemed to come alive at night with sounds that defied explanation. The snapping of twigs, the rustling of leaves, the soft whispers that seemed to emanate from the surrounding woods. Sleep wouldn't come. Her mind raced with thoughts of what could be out there. Every creak of the trees, every sigh of the wind sent shivers down her spine. The forest was alive with sounds that seemed to be closing in on her. She lay awake, listening, her heart pounding in her chest, her eyes wide with fear. Then she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold, a distinct scratching sound like claws on bark coming from just outside her tent. It was deliberate, methodical, and terrifying. It was close, too close. She could almost feel the vibrations through the ground. Sarah lay frozen, her breath caught in her throat, her mind racing. The scratching stopped. Silence. The kind of silence that is more terrifying than any noise. Then a thud, followed by the sound of heavy breathing just inches from her head. The sound was so close she could almost feel the breath on her skin. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, her entire body trembling as a wave of terror washed over her. She tried to remain as still as possible, hoping whatever it was would go away. She lay there for what felt like an eternity. The silence punctuated only by the sound of her own ragged breathing, and the heavy breathing just outside her tent. The tension was unbearable. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, she reached for her flashlight. Her hands shook as she fumbled in the dark. As she fumbled with the switch, the heavy breathing stopped. The silence was deafening. She hesitated for a moment, then turned on the light. With trembling hands, she flicked on the flashlight and slowly unzipped the tent flap, her heart pounding in her ears. She braced herself for what she might see. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the dense fog and the looming shadows of the trees. The forest was eerily still. There was no sign of whatever had been lurking outside her tent. The night seemed to have swallowed it whole. Relief washed over her, followed by a wave of exhaustion. She felt her body relax slightly, but the fear still lingered. She spent the rest of the night huddled in her sleeping bag, flashlight clutched in her hand, her eyes darting nervously at every sound. Sleep was a distant hope. As dawn broke, Sarah wasted no time packing up her gear and fleeing the abandoned campsite. The first light of day brought a sense of urgency. She never discovered what had made those terrifying sounds that night, but the experience left an indelible mark on her psyche. The forest had revealed its dark side. The memory of that night, the heavy breathing, the scratching at her tent, continued to haunt her, a chilling reminder of the unseen horrors that lurk in the darkness, waiting for the moment to strike fear into the hearts of those who dare to venture into their domain. Sarah knew she would never forget the whispers in the abandoned campsite. The Thompson family, excited for a week of bonding and adventure, arrived at Harmony Campground, a picturesque spot nestled amidst towering pines and sparkling streams. The campground, usually bustling with families, was eerily deserted, a fact they initially attributed to the off-season. They set up camp, their laughter echoing through the unsettling silence of the campground, unaware of the ominous presence that lurked in the shadows. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the deserted campsites, the family gathered around a crackling fire, the warmth of the flames providing a false sense of security. They shared stories and roasted marshmallows, but as the flames died down and darkness enveloped the campground, a sense of unease settled over them. The silence, once peaceful, now felt oppressive, broken only by the distant howling of wolves, their cries seeming to echo the growing fear in their hearts. Their 10-year-old daughter Lily was the first to notice the strange occurrences. She claimed to see figures lurking in the shadows, their movements almost imperceptible but undeniably there, their eyes glowing ominously in the darkness. Her parents dismissed it as an overactive imagination, but a seed of doubt had been planted, growing with each passing minute. Later that night, as the family slept soundly in their tent, a series of unsettling events unfolded. Unexplained noises, whispers, and rustling sounds seemed to emanate from just outside their tent, their peaceful slumber disturbed by an unseen presence. The whispering grew louder, morphing into guttural growls and snarls that sent shivers down their spines. The once serene campground had transformed into a nightmarish landscape. The family huddled together, their breaths held tight, their eyes wide with terror as the sounds seemed to encircle their tent. Suddenly the tent ripped open, exposing them to the cold, menacing night, throwing them into darkness and chaos. Panicked screams filled the night air as they scrambled out of the tent, their hearts pounding in their chests. Through the darkness they could see figures closing in on them, their eyes glowing with a malevolent intensity. Instinct took over and they fled, their bare feet pounding on the cold, hard ground, the terror driving them forward, their screams swallowed by the vast emptiness of the campground. They didn't stop running until they reached their car, the engine sputtering to life as they fumbled with the keys, their pursuers closing in on them. As they sped away, they could see the figures watching them from the edge of the campground, their glowing eyes burning into their memories, a haunting reminder of the terror they had escaped. The Thompson family never returned to Harmony Campground, forever haunted by the terrifying events of that night. The experience left them shaken and terrified, their once cherished memories of camping trips replaced with the chilling realization that some places are best left undisturbed. The haunting of Harmony Campground would remain a dark chapter in their lives, a story they would never forget, and a place they would never dare to revisit. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more terrifying tales. And remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones we can't see. The next time you find yourself surrounded by the stillness of the woods, remember the stories you've heard. Pay attention to the sounds of the night, the rustling leaves, the snapping twigs. And if you ever get the feeling that you're not alone, that something is watching you from the shadows, trust your instincts. You might just be right.